Ethan's glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble floor. Red wine splashed over his shirt. His knees buckled. One hand clawed at the edge of the dining table, but the strength rushed out of his body so fast it felt as though someone had pulled a cord inside him. His breath came in broken pieces. "Ethan!" Isabella was already on her feet. Her chair scraped back. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she ran around the table, dropping gracefully to her knees beside him. Her perfume hit him before her hands did. Soft, floral, expensive. The same perfume she wore when reporters called them the perfect couple. "Look at me," she said, cupping his face. "Ethan, baby, look at me." He tried. Her face blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. His tongue felt thick. His stomach twisted so violently he almost vomited right there on the floor. Call someone," he choked. "I already am." Her voice trembled just enough to sound real. She reached for her phone, pressed it to her ear, and began to cry. The crying was what frightened him most, because even through the dizziness, even through the cold sweat running down his back, Ethan knew one thing with terrifying certainty. She had done this. He had seen it. Not clearly, not enough to prove, but enough to know. The tiny movement of her hand over his plate, the brief pause before she set the glass down in front of him, the way she had watched him take the first sip. Now footsteps thundered through the hallway as security and staff rushed in. "What happened?" someone shouted. "He just collapsed. Oh my God. Ethan, stay with me. Please stay with me." Ethan forced his head to turn. He looked at the overturned wine bottle, then at the half-empty glass by his chair. Then he looked at her. Their eyes locked. For 1 second, the tears vanished. Her face went still, cold, almost curious. Then the panic returned so quickly it would have fooled anyone, everyone except him. By the time the paramedics arrived, Isabella was kneeling on the floor beside him, shaking, sobbing, pressing one elegant hand to his chest while she begged him not to leave her. By midnight, half the city knew Ethan Cole had collapsed during dinner and that his devoted wife had been the one to save him. By morning, social media was flooded with their photos again. Power couple, golden couple, real love still exists. He's lucky to have a woman like that. Ethan stared at the hospital television in silence until the nurse turned it off. "You should rest, Mr. Cole," she said gently. He gave a weak nod. As soon as she left, he reached for the small voice recorder hidden beneath his blanket, clicked it on, and whispered through cracked lips, "If I die, my wife killed me." He clicked it off and hid it again just before the door opened. Isabella walked in carrying white roses. Of course she did. She wore cream silk, no heavy makeup, no flashy jewelry, only a simple wedding band and grief in her eyes. To the world, she looked like the portrait of loyal love. "Hey," she said softly, moving toward the bed. "How are you feeling?" He didn't answer. She set the flowers down, adjusted the water with careful fingers, then pulled a chair closer and sat beside him. "The doctors said it may have been a severe reaction or stress. They're still not sure." He watched her. She met his gaze with perfect calm. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "You know why." A pause. Then she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Ethan, not this again." "You touched the glass." "I poured your wine." "You watched me drink it." "Because you were talking." Her tone stayed light, patient, affectionate. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" He swallowed hard. His throat still burned. "What did you put in it?" She stared at him, then let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "You almost died, and this is where your mind goes." His hand tightened around the bedsheet. "Answer me." Her expression changed, not into fear, into sadness, the practiced kind. "You need help," she whispered. He felt something cold slide through his chest. She stood, walked to the door, and looked back at him as though he had broken his heart. "Do you know what it's like to spend every day taking care of someone who doesn't trust you?" "You're lying." "I called the ambulance. I stayed with you. I haven't slept, and now you're accusing me of poisoning you." She wiped at her eye. "You need to hear how that sounds." Then she opened the door wider. Dr. Halpern was standing there. Ethan's stomach dropped. The doctor stepped inside with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Cole told me you seemed distressed." "Mrs. Cole told me. Of course she did." Ethan looked from the doctor to Isabella and back again. A neat little team, a worried wife, a trusted physician, one dangerous man starting to sound unstable. "I'm not distressed," Ethan said. Dr. Halpern folded his hands. "Your wife says you've been under growing pressure for months. Lack of sleep, irritability, paranoia." "Paranoia," Ethan's voice cracked. "I collapsed after dinner." "And your tests," the doctor said carefully, "don't show evidence of common poisons." Isabella stood near the window with her arms wrapped around herself, the picture of hurt loyalty. "I didn't want to tell him, but I'm scared. He's been saying strange things. He keeps asking if I'm trying to hurt him." Ethan stared at her. "Because you are." The doctor's eyes softened with pity for her. "Perhaps," he said, "a psychiatric consult would also be useful." Ethan almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the trap was visible now, beautifully arranged. He leaned back against the pillows and said nothing more, not because he believed them, because he suddenly understood that saying too much would make everything worse. Dr. Halpern murmured a few reassuring words to Isabella, then left. She followed him to the door, whispering just loudly enough for Ethan to hear. "Thank you. I'm really worried about him." When the door returned, she shut it and stood still. The sorrow drained from her face like water down a sink. "There," she said, "that's what happens when you lose control." Ethan's pulse kicked. She smiled faintly. "You were always arrogant. You thought being powerful meant being believed." "What do you want?" Her head tilted. "That's an interesting question." "Money." She laughed. "You think so small when you're afraid." He wanted to lunge at her. Instead, he barely managed to sit upright. She stepped closer to the bed and lowered her voice. "You should stop saying these things out loud. People are starting to worry." "You slipped something into my drink. Can you prove it?" His silence answered for him. She leaned in and smoothed the blanket near his chest, like a loving wife tending his fragile husband. Then, "Rest," she whispered. "Get stronger. Smile for the cameras. Try not to collapse again." Before leaving, she kissed his forehead. If a camera had been there, the city would have melted. The moment the door closed, Ethan dragged the recorder out again, his hands shaking harder now. He clicked it on. "She knows I know. She said I can't prove it." He clicked it off and stared at the ceiling until dawn. 3 days later, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. The press was waiting outside the hospital. Isabella stood beside him, one arm linked gently through his, guiding him down the steps like he was fragile glass. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Cole, are you feeling better? Mrs. Cole, how scary was that night? How are you both coping?"
Isabella gave a trembling smile. "We're just grateful. It reminded us how precious life is." One reporter grinned. "Sir, everyone's saying you're the luckiest man alive." Ethan felt Isabella's hand tighten around his arm. He looked straight into the cameras and almost told the truth. Instead, he forced a dead smile. The car door shut behind them. Neither spoke until they were moving. Then Isabella crossed one leg over the other and said, "That was almost very stupid." Ethan kept his eyes on the passing city. "You can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Pretending. You should be more specific." He turned to face her. "Why am I only sick after eating with you?" She met his stare. "Maybe guilt tastes bad." His jaw tightened. "I haven't done anything to deserve this." That made her smile. Not warmly, not kindly, just knowingly. "People like you always say that." He wanted to ask what that meant, but the driver was in the front seat, and she would not say more here. She knew that. He knew that. So the rest of the ride passed in silence thick as...
By 7:30, the mansion was glowing like nothing was wrong. Candles flickered in the dining room. Soft music drifted through hidden speakers. Crystal glasses lined the table with perfect symmetry. The chef, new, silent, unknown to Ethan, moved in and out with assistants who never met his eyes. And Isabella looked radiant. She stood at the bottom of the staircase in a dark green gown, one hand resting lightly on the banister, smiling as the first guests arrived. Investors, 2 board members, an old senator Ethan had done business with, a media couple known for appearing wherever wealth gathered. To them, the coal mansion was not a crime scene, it was a symbol of power. Ethan descended the stairs in a black suit and a face he hoped looked human. The room turned toward him. "There he is," Senator Grayson boomed. "The man of the hour. You gave us a scare." Ethan forced a smile and shook his hand. "Still here." "Thanks to her," one of the board members said, nodding at Isabella. "Absolutely," Isabella replied, with graceful embarrassment. "I'm just grateful he's recovering." She slid her hand into the crook of Ethan's arm. To everyone else it looked intimate. To Ethan it felt like a cuff. "You should be resting," said Helena, one of the investors' wives, touching his sleeve. "But it's lovely to see you up." "I didn't want Isabella entertaining alone." A few people laughed warmly at that. His wife looked up at him like she adored him. He hates being left out. If only they knew, Ethan thought. He scanned the room. No Marcus. Of course not. Marcus wouldn't show himself until he had something useful. Ethan's pulse kept ticking harder anyway. Every tray passing by made him tense. Every glass being filled felt like a loaded weapon changing hands. A waiter approached with champagne. Isabella took one flute and offered the other to Ethan. There it was, a tiny test, casual, public, deadly. He smiled without taking it. "Doctor's orders." One of the guests chuckled. "Still obeying doctors. That's how they know you're really sick." Isabella switched the offered glass to another guest without missing a beat. "He's being careful." Her eyes flicked to Ethan's for a fraction of a second. He had embarrassed her. Good. Dinner was announced. As everyone moved toward the dining room, Ethan's phone vibrated once in his pocket. He didn't react until he was seated. Isabella had arranged the table so she sat at the far end, him at the near, guests between them like witnesses in a silent trial. He slipped his phone beneath the napkin on his lap and glanced down. From Marcus, "I'm in. Keep her talking. Stall if you can." Ethan's heart thundered once hard. In. What did that mean? Inside the house? Inside her records? Inside her room? He didn't know, but whatever Marcus was doing, Ethan had to hold the line. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood dish. Ethan didn't touch it. Helena noticed immediately. "You're really not eating?" "Still adjusting," he said. Isabella lifted her glass. "He's being dramatic. It's one bite, Ethan." He looked straight at her. "You first." A few people laughed again, thinking it was marital teasing. She smiled. "I had some earlier." "That's not what I said." Now the laughter thinned out. One of the board members cleared his throat. "So, Ethan, are you planning to return next week? We've postponed 2 decisions pending your sign-off." Before Ethan could answer, Isabella did. "He shouldn't be rushed." He kept his gaze at her. "I didn't know you were speaking for me in meetings now." She tilted her head, still smiling. "I'm speaking out of concern. And I'm speaking out of experience. Nobody should make decisions on my behalf while I'm still alive." Silence spread around the table. Helena looked down at her plate. The senator took a measured sip of wine. Someone shifted in their chair. Then Isabella laughed gently, as if smoothing over a child's tantrum. He gets intense when he's recovering. He wanted to flip the table. Instead, he leaned back and said, "Maybe, or maybe nearly dying changes your tolerance for being managed." She held his gaze. The room felt tighter now, the air thinner. One of the guests forced a change of subject, launching into some meaningless story about a charity gala, but Ethan barely heard it. His phone vibrated again. He checked it beneath the table. "Need access to her office. 10 mins. Cause distraction." Ethan slid the phone away and looked up. Cause distraction. He had 10 minutes. He rose slowly from his chair. Every eye turned toward him again. "I want to make a toast," he said. The guests brightened with relief. A toast was normal. A toast meant the tension would end. A servant filled Ethan's water glass. He didn't drink it. He lifted it anyway. To survival. A few people smiled and raised their glasses. To truth, Ethan added. Isabella's smile froze at the edges. And to the people who stand beside you when you're weak, especially the ones who know exactly how weak you are. Nobody lifted their glass this time. Isabella set hers down quietly. "Ethan." He ignored her. "Funny thing about weakness, it reveals everyone. It shows you who loves you, who fears you, and who was only waiting for the right moment to take everything." The senator let out an awkward laugh. "All right, that's dark enough for one dinner." But Ethan was already turning toward Isabella. "You said today that people like me never care about the bodies left behind." A board member frowned. "What is he talking about?" Isabella stood. "You're being overtired." "No, let's not do that. Not in front of our guests." Her voice dropped half a degree. "Sit down." He smiled without warmth. "Why? Afraid of what I'll say?" The room went still. She walked toward him slowly, elegance wrapped around threat. "You need to stop. And you need to stop pretending." "Ethan," one of the board members said sharply, "what is this?" He looked around the table. "Has she told any of you who her father was?" A pulse went through the room. Isabella's face changed. Not much, but enough. That is enough. "No," Ethan said. "I'm just getting honest." She reached for his arm. He stepped back before she could touch him. There, gasps, shock, the perfect couple cracking in public. "Don't touch me." Now the guests were openly staring. Helena whispered, "Oh my God." Isabella's eyes glittered. "You are humiliating yourself." "Maybe, but at least I know what I am." "And what do you think I am?"
He almost said murderer right there. Almost. But if he played that card too early without proof, she would turn it into madness again. He could feel that trap waiting. So he changed direction. "I think," he said, loud enough for everyone, "that we've both been lying to this room." Nobody moved. Then, suddenly, the power cut. The room dropped into darkness. Several guests cried out. Someone knocked over a glass. A chair scraped harshly against the floor. Perfect distraction. Emergency lights flickered on a few seconds later, throwing the dining room into dim amber shadows. Isabella turned at once toward the doorway. What happened? A servant hurried in. "Ma'am, it seems to be a main panel issue." The senator muttered, "In this neighborhood?" Another servant appeared with candles. The room dissolved into nervous chatter. Isabella was already moving, issuing calm instructions, taking control, becoming the composed hostess again. But Ethan saw the tension in her jaw now. Something had slipped out of her hands. He used the confusion to step away from the table and move into the hallway. His phone buzzed once. "Almost done. Keep her occupied." Ethan turned just as Isabella appeared at the dining room entrance. "There you are," she said. The emergency lighting sharpened her cheekbones and hollowed her eyes. She looked beautiful and dangerous, and suddenly less untouchable than before. He gave a tired smile. "Checking on my own house. You're making a scene. You seem nervous." She walked toward him until a few feet separated them. Voices drifted from the dining room behind her, but the hallway itself felt sealed off. "Listen carefully," she said softly. "Whatever game you think you're playing, stop now. Go back inside, apologize, and smile. And if I don't?" She leaned in. "Then tonight gets worse." "For who?" "For you," she said. "It always gets worse for you." He studied her face. "Did you cut the power?" Her eyes narrowed. "Not
Everything that happens in this house is orchestrated by me. Most of it is." She almost smiled. "And still you stayed." That landed because it was true. He had stayed, trusted, married, shared a bed with a woman who had mapped out his destruction like a project. He heard footsteps. One of the servants approached with a candle tray, but Isabella dismissed him with a look. When they were alone again, Ethan said, "What happens when people stop believing your act?" "They won't." "You're that sure?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I understand something you never did." Her voice stayed low and calm. "People believe what flatters them. They want beautiful lies. They want devotion, elegance, sacrifice. Nobody wants the truth if the truth is ugly." He gave a hard laugh. "That's the first honest thing you've said." She folded her arms. "And what have you said honestly? That your success crushed people? That your empire was built on damage? That your wife didn't appear in your life by fate, but by consequence?" He stepped closer. "If you wanted me ruined, you could have exposed me." "No." Her expression sharpened. "Exposure is quick. I wanted understanding." "By poisoning me? By making you feel helpless." The words struck him like a slap. She wasn't just trying to kill him. She wanted him to know what helplessness felt like before he died. Footsteps sounded again. A servant approached to say the generator had restored partial power and dessert could still be served in the lounge. Isabella turned on a smile so smoothly it was monstrous. "Wonderful, thank you." Then she looked back at Ethan as if the previous exchange had never happened. "Come back inside, darling. Everyone's waiting." He followed because he had to. The guests had relocated to the lounge, where candles and low lamps made the room look intimate instead of unstable. Some were amused now, treating the outage like a glamorous inconvenience. Others watched Ethan and Isabella too carefully. Good, he thought. Let them wonder. Dessert appeared. Chocolate tarts, coffee, liqueurs. Ethan touched none of it. The media couple were whispering together in one corner. One board member had moved aside to make a phone call. The senator was already telling a story to reclaim the mood. Isabella floated through it all like a queen restoring order after brief unrest. Then the front doors opened. Marcus Reed walked in wearing a dark suit and an expression of polite urgency. Every nerve in Ethan's body snapped awake. Marcus was not supposed to be visible. Isabella saw him too, and for the first time all night, Ethan witnessed something priceless on her face. Alarm. Marcus smiled apologetically at the room. "Forgive the interruption. Ethan, I need a word. It can't wait." One of the guests frowned. "At this hour?" Marcus barely spared him a glance. "Company matter." Isabella stepped forward. "Whatever it is can wait until morning." Marcus turned to her. "Actually, it concerns you too." The room hushed. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. What had Marcus found? Was he bluffing? Was he buying time? He couldn't tell, but Marcus's eyes held his for a fraction of a second, and the message was clear. Follow my lead. Marcus reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a small amber vial sealed in a plastic evidence bag. Nobody breathed. "I found this," he said, "in Mrs. Cole's private office, hidden in a locked drawer." Isabella's face did not move. Marcus lifted the bag higher. "And before anyone asks why I was in that office, Ethan asked me to secure the property and review staff changes after his collapse." A lie, but a useful one. The senator stood. "What is that?" Marcus looked at Ethan. "The lab is rushing confirmation, but based on preliminary analysis, it appears to be a concentrated compound capable of causing progressive neurological damage in small doses." Helena covered her mouth. The media couple stared openly now. One board member whispered, "Jesus Christ." Ethan looked at Isabella. She looked back at him. No tears, no collapse, no desperate denial, just calculation. Then she smiled. It was small, almost elegant. "Well," she said softly, "this got interesting fast." The room went colder. Marcus took one step closer. "You want to explain it?" Isabella's gaze moved from Marcus to Ethan and back again. "Not particularly." "You understand what this looks like?" Marcus pressed. She gave a light shrug. "It looks like a man in panic sent his loyal friend to dig through his wife's things and manufacture a scandal." Marcus's jaw tightened. "There will be fingerprints, residue, trace evidence. There will also be lawyers," she replied. Ethan took a step forward. "You said I couldn't prove it." Her eyes locked on his. "And yet here you are, still trying." She glanced around the room, measuring every witness, every shifting loyalty, every mind already choosing sides. Then her gaze returned to Ethan, and her voice softened into something almost intimate. "You should have left while you still could." No one in the room mistook that for affection. The silence that followed was thick, electric, unbearable, and Ethan knew with sudden terrifying clarity that whatever happened next would not stay inside the walls of this mansion.
I'm carrying the confrontation straight into the final escalation and payoff, keeping the same continuous third-person flow and high tension. Thought for 4S. The silence broke all at once. Helena rose first, her chair scraping back so sharply that everyone flinched. "Someone needs to call the police." "They're already on the way," Marcus said. That shifted the room instantly. The senator straightened. One board member cursed under his breath. The media couple looked delighted and horrified at the same time, as though they knew they were watching the collapse of a myth and were already imagining headlines. Isabella did not move. She stood near the fireplace in the low amber light, one hand resting lightly against the mantel, beautiful and composed, and more frightening than any screaming person Ethan had ever met. "You called the police?" she asked Marcus. "I called people who won't be charmed by a designer dress and a sad smile." A few guests recoiled at the cruelty of that line. Isabella didn't. She only looked at Ethan. "So this is how you wanted it to end?" "No," Ethan said. "I wanted the truth." She tilted her head. "No, you wanted control back." That landed harder than he expected, because part of it was true. He had lived most of his life believing that money, precision, and force of will could solve anything. Now he was standing in his own house, barely recovered, exposed in front of his peers, waiting to see whether the woman who shared his bed would walk free because she was smarter than everyone in the room. Marcus held up the evidence bag again. "You can save your speech for detectives." The first board member, Raymond Pike, stepped closer, pale with disbelief. "Isabella, just say this isn't yours." She looked at him and almost smiled. "Why would that matter to you, Raymond? Are you shocked because Ethan might have been poisoned, or because if this becomes public, the company loses 10% by opening bell?" Raymond went silent. That answered the question for everyone. The senator muttered, "My God!" Ethan saw it clearly then. The room had finally stopped seeing her as a devoted wife and started seeing her as an unknown quantity. Dangerous, intelligent, unreadable, good. But he also knew this was the most dangerous moment of all. People like Isabella did not panic in obvious ways. They adapted. And adaptation in someone like her could be fatal. The distant sound of sirens began to rise outside the gates. A servant rushed in, frightened. "Sir, there are police vehicles outside." Nobody answered him. Marcus stepped forward. "No one leaves." That should have helped. Instead, Ethan felt the room fracture. Some guests looked offended by being commanded. Others looked eager to slip away before their names got attached to a scandal. One of the media couple had already lowered her eyes to her phone, probably messaging someone despite every instinct of self-preservation. Raymond Pike was sweating through his collar. Helena looked physically ill. And Isabella? She laughed. It was soft, almost tired. Then she pushed away from the fireplace and said, "You all look so disappointed." No one spoke. She turned slowly, taking in each face. "You wanted a story about devotion, about a wife who saved her husband, about love in a world where people don't believe in it anymore. And now that the story is ugly, none of you know where to look." "You poisoned him," Helena whispered. Isabella's gaze moved to her. "Did I?" Marcus took another step. "Stop talking in riddles." "And what will you do if I don't?" she asked. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red light began to flicker across the high windows. Ethan should have felt relief. Instead, a deeper dread began to move through him, because Isabella had not broken, not once. Not when he confronted her, not when Marcus brought the vial, not even now. That meant she still thought she had a way through this. His eyes darted around the room. Coffee cups, dessert plates, half-finished drinks, guests packed too closely together, windows, fire exits, security personnel somewhere outside the lounge but not inside it, too many variables. Then Isabella looked directly at Ethan and said, "Tell them, Ethan." He went still. "Tell them what?" "Tell them what happened to Daniel Vale." The room shifted again. Marcus frowned. "Don't do this." But Ethan already knew she would not stop. He could either take control of the truth or let her weaponize it. So he swallowed hard and said, "Years ago, my company acquired a pharmaceutical subcontractor. There was litigation, debt. We closed the business." "Say it properly," Isabella said. He kept his eyes on her. "People lost everything. And..." He hesitated. Her voice turned sharp, and he heard his own heartbeat. Then, before the police, before the board, before the investors and the witnesses and the world he had spent years managing, Ethan Cole said the words he had never expected to say aloud. "I signed the order that finished it." Silence. He continued, because now that it had started, it had to come all the way out. "I told myself it was business, strategic, necessary. I didn't look at the families behind the numbers. I didn't look at what happened after. I didn't care enough to." Helena slowly lowered herself back into her chair, as if her legs could no longer hold her. The senator stared at Ethan with something like disgust. Raymond Pike looked furious, but Ethan could not tell whether that anger was moral or financial. Isabella's face changed, not into softness, but into something stranger, satisfaction laced with grief. "There he is," she said quietly, "the first honest version of you I've ever seen." The doors to the lounge opened. 2 detectives entered with uniformed officers behind them. "No one move," one of them said. The room erupted into overlapping voices at once. Marcus stepped forward immediately, identified himself, handed over the evidence bag and began explaining. The officers started separating people, asking names, directing everyone to remain where they were. One detective, a tall woman with cool, unreadable eyes, approached Ethan first. "Mr. Cole, yes, we need your statement." Before he could answer, Isabella spoke from across the room. "Be careful, he's been unwell." The detective turned to look at her. "And you are?" "His wife. Stay where you are." A faint smile touched Isabella's mouth. "Of course." Ethan gave his statement in clipped pieces. Collapse at dinner, repeated sickness after meals, suspicion, his admission that he had hired Marcus to investigate discreetly. He did not sound dramatic. He did not accuse wildly. He forced himself to speak like a man who knew his credibility had already been tested and nearly lost. The detective listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Did your wife ever directly admit intent to harm you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, "but I failed to record the clearest admission." Marcus cursed under his breath from across the room. The detective nodded once. "We'll work with what we have." Across the lounge, another officer was questioning Isabella. She answered with maddening calm. Yes, Ethan had been stressed. Yes, he had grown paranoid. Yes, he had accused her before. No, she did not know what was in the vial. No, she did not consent to Marcus searching her office. No, she loved her husband very much. Ethan felt a wave of fury rise again. Even now, she could still perform tenderness like a weapon. The detective stepped aside after a few minutes and conferred quietly with Marcus. Ethan tried to read her expression and failed. Then she returned. "Mrs. Cole, we need you to come with us for further questioning." A murmur went through the room. Not an arrest, not yet. Questioning, it was not enough. Isabella saw that too, saw the exact second she understood she still had room to move. "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time." There it was, the opening. The room seemed to feel it all at once. The officers were good, but they were responding to a developing case, not a finished one. There was evidence, but not total chain of custody certainty. There were suspicions, but not final
lab reports. There was motive, but motive was not proof, and Isabella was already calculating. Ethan knew it, Marcus knew it, maybe even the detective knew it, but knowing and proving were not the same thing. Isabella reached for her shawl from the back of a chair. An officer moved to assist, but she lifted a hand lightly, as if to say she was perfectly capable. Then, in one fluid motion, she turned, seized a dessert knife from the silver tray beside her, and pressed it to Helena's throat. The room exploded. Helena screamed. Chairs toppled. Someone shouted for everybody to get back. One of the media couple drew his weapon instantly. Another lunged, but stopped when Isabella dragged Helena tighter against her. "No," Isabella snapped. "No one moved."